Happy Mother's Day. The year that my father passed, so I was 21, and we do these big family Christmases with his side of the family, and that stuff is in June. It's like or April, or like just all these crazy things. We do these family Christmases, and the year that he passed, like we would do it at this big at Clara's downtown in Battle Creek, and this big long table with all our family members. And the year that he passed, somehow I was dead smack in the middle of the table. Somehow across the seat, directly across from me, was an empty chair. Of all the places, why did that chair have to be right here across from me? And the whole time I was on, the whole time that I was sitting there, I would drink my water, I would just do anything to try to take my mind off it. But it's Mother's Day. It's Mother's Day. There's a kid right now, just would have been 26 this weekend. It's a kid right now. His mom's table's empty today. His seat is empty today. It's going to be empty every day from now on. So that's why I think, in light, it's interesting how this stuff works. You know, I shared my story about some of my fears of black males as it relates to my post-traumatic stress disorder, as it relates to getting shot, to getting jumped last week. Then I get it, this stuff comes out. I get a call from my old pastor. He wants me to be on a show. So I did a Zoom call with him, and then I just started posting about some stuff, actually on TikTok, and people have been responding a ton, and man, it's nuts. So I want to have a conversation with Dewan. Dewan's one of the dudes that he's gonna look at himself before he looks at anybody else. And I think that's part of what we need as a culture, as a society. Dewan, do you want to introduce yourself and go ahead and do this radio style?
I'm Dewan Dandridge, really good friend of Steve, and a black dude in Detroit that was just here to share my perspective on this subject and have this conversation with Steve, and I'm glad to be here.
Why is it 2020? And that's what somebody brought up. This isn't 1960. We're having these conversations now. Why is this happening?
I would say as any other question on a subject matter this heavy and this layered, there's a bunch of reasons, right? But I would say that one of the things that we don't see happening enough is we don't see people being prosecuted and locked up for this. And the idea and the thought of it being illegal to kill a black person is still fairly new when it comes to white people and this country. And I mean, it's a newer law on the books if you talk about the grand scheme of things. But even with it being a law on the books, we still don't see consistent prosecution. We consistently see people get off, especially white folks, when it comes to this type of stuff. So I think that we love the kumbaya, and we would love to live in a space where we all loved each other. But I mean, for me, I'd just be happy if people were scared that they would spend the rest of their lives in jail if they killed a black person, just like they are concerned about that if it was anybody else, if it was any other nationality, maybe not Latino, but if it was a white person, I just don't think that you see people take those type of actions. Those are some of my first level or first layer thoughts on why we're still seeing this happen.
And that was one of the other questions we had. Does this happen if it's a white person? So do we get to the place? And I think part of the thing, somebody brought up the question for me, is they brought up, because a few days ago, also what happened this week is a black lady comes in, shoots up at McDonald's, 2 white people get injured. And they were saying, how come we don't hear people making a big fuss about this kind of stuff when it's white people that are the victims, But if it's the other way around, that, that's the thing. And I think for me, at least one of the issues is this. It's like every day, and getting to your point about the justice system, like after this happened, like these dudes were just living their normal lives. And that's the crazy part. Like she is immediately locked up and taken into custody. These guys are just going about their daily lives, and there's just a difference in the way that they're treated and the way that the justice system is set up. And so that's part of the challenge as well. And so we can get into this back and forth about whose lives are more important, or who cares more, or like how are people responding across the country. And I think that's an appropriate conversation too. But part of it is like, man, these guys were just allowed to keep going and to do whatever they wanted to do at the time until now, until we saw the video. If we don't see the video, we're like, what happens? Why do we need to see a video for justice to be served or for the process to begin is part of the question.
Definitely. So to your point of like, why don't we hear about this? That question of like, why don't we hear about this? Like we do. We just call it the news. You know what I mean? It's like all you have to do is turn on the news or watch Cops. Or one of the many platforms that people have to tell narratives about people in the black communities. But I would say that, it's interesting that people want to point to that and point to say, like, why isn't everybody in an uproar about this, as opposed to saying, like, I want to stand with Ahmaud's family. Like, I want to see some justice. And I think we're always looking for an excuse for us to not look in the mirrors. And that's like us. I say us, I mean, period. Like, definitely the white community needs to take some time, like taking a real serious look in the mirror. But I mean, I think that we all have been trained in some of the same things when it comes to valuing black lives. I just don't think that like any community can poke their chest out and say that we value black lives well. But to the question of like, why don't we see this? I mean, we see it all the time. Like whoever asked that question, just tell them to watch their local news, and I'm sure they'll see something if they live anywhere close to a big city that depicts black folks in a bad light doing something crazy.
Yeah, and they're talking specifically about the social media uproar and not necessarily the news, because it does get a little bit of news attention, but that's part of it. I think too, one of the things I would love to see people chime in on in the comments is like, what do you think happens in this scenario if there were two black shooters? Like, how does this thing play out? So you get a 25-year-old white kid running down, and you get two black dudes in a pickup truck that hem him in. He still tries to go around him, and then they start firing on him. Like, what happens then? I'm curious about what people think. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if they are lucky, they make it to jail. But they're
Right.
definitely not sitting anywhere still for like, sitting in the comforts of their home, for a couple months, waiting on the rest of the world to cry out for them to get locked up. I think that they're immediately locked up if they make it to jail. You know what I mean?
And somebody just said the Endurance ECC author said they would either be dead or in jail. That's what would have happened. One of the things when we talk about why is this happening, this is part of why I started sharing, is because I do think that there are things in our lives that just go unchecked. I think there's stereotypes. For me, Stephen Marshall said the difference is how the justice system operates based on color and socioeconomic status. For me, the reason why I started sharing is because I realized this stuff in my head, like, and the stuff that's like happening inside of me, like, there's some messed up stuff going in there. And so the reason I wanted to share it isn't just so I could like, air my stuff out to the world, but part of it is like, look, I want us all to be able to look into the mirror and say, like, look, how am I responding? What are the emotions? What are the thoughts, feelings when I'm in different situations? when I'm in different settings, when I see different scenarios, when I see the news things, like how am I responding emotionally? How am I responding? What's my thought process look like? Versus when you see different people, what are you dismissing? What are you getting angry at? All of those kind of things. How are you responding to different scenarios? I think a lot of us have some, like, a heavy amount of interior work to do that we're not necessarily doing or even aware of. And then I think that leads to both the situations like this happening, but then also that has a huge influence on how we respond, right? So if we're not looking in the mirror, if we're not really like doing the heavy lifting of trying to kind of figure out our own thoughts, find our own weaknesses, that puts us in a tight spot overall. And I think as I talked about my trauma, one of the things I mentioned is, like, I think we have an American trauma. I think there's an American trauma that's happening. Like, to me, it's clear what happens when somebody gets shot. What happens when people come back from the war, and you understand that. Like, that's very clear. It's very cut and dry. When you have a day-to-day, from the time that you were raised, like, there's certain things in the way that we ingest information, even the amount of violence that we're subjected to, and what's played in front of us, also what we hear, the conversations that we have, all of that kind of stuff, that has an impact on how we view and how we interact with people. And so that's why I wanted to start talking about that and start with myself. It's like, look, I'm going to look in the mirror, and I'm not doing that just for, there's nothing special about me. What I'm trying to kind of, like, point people to is, like, we all should be looking in the mirror.
Yeah. So can I flip it and ask you a couple questions on that, right?
Yeah, man.
So why do you need to look in the mirror, right? It's like you don't use the N words when it comes to talking about describing black people. You have a Jamaican wife that's, black. You're raising children that are biracial, so why do you, like, feel the need to do any self-reflecting when it comes to this subject matter?
It's interesting when they talk about the idea of forgiveness, and this isn't a forgiveness issue with me, but I think the principle is the same. When they talk about the idea of forgiveness, it's like they talk about it like when you hold bitterness in toward another person, it's like, and you're trying to do that to get at them. It's like taking a bottle of poison and waiting for them to die. Like, you drink the poison and you wait for them to die. And so for me, like, that's part of what it was. It's like realizing, like, there's some stuff, like, but I think the advantage I have, like, it was traumatic. It is super obvious. And it has, like, this, it has a really negative impact. It has caused my life to go from, like, there is no normal for me anymore. Going to get Little Caesars. And seriously, there's been at least 3 incidents specifically at Little Caesars that have, like, just caused me to, like, lose it. And I hate that stuff. I hate that. It's a horrible feeling. I think part of it is I think I was, from a young age, and as I started doing a self-audit, like, I've always been drawn to people different than me. I think God wired me to be here doing this, having these conversations. I also think that, man, if we're going to say we believe this, that, and the other, like, I'm big on that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's one of the biggest things. I think that the genius of Dr. King was that he didn't just come, like, he could have just came, like, trying to run people over with stuff. What he did is he did like Paul did in Athens. It's like, man, I see you guys are very religious. He's like, I see you guys value this. I see this is what America is. And then he called them, so let's live up to this. You know what I'm saying? Like, he studied the people, and in order to get them to move forward, he used the stuff that they said they believe. So when I see that this is what we say America is, this is what we say a great America is, where people get treated like people, where everybody gets a shot, where the justice system works for everybody, like that's what I'm saying. Like that's why I'm like, I need to look in the mirror, because it's not in my head, and that's the disconnect. Because I see a personal disconnect with me. Like in my head, when I'm out in public, I'm like, this dude he's just going about his life like I am. But in my physiology, like something else is happening. And so as much as I say that to my mind, like my body's still responding in a different way. There's a disconnect going on there. And so I think that actually is somewhat of a picture of what's happening in the U.S. Like we can say on the surface, we're like, no, dude, I love everybody. I love everybody. Some of my best friends are black. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
Like, or white or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Some of my best friend is so-and-so. My best man, my this, my that. I get along good with my coworker, that kind of stuff. But I think that's on the surface. I think some of the deeper levels, our subconscious, there's some other things going on. And so when I recognize that there is a difference between what's happening in my mind and my subconscious, like this, and I can't even, and for me it's like, it's flagrant. Like it's like, I'm in danger. I need to run, you know, and and this other part of me is like, no, dude, you're downtown. It's 10 a.m. Relax. Like he's just downtown doing what you are downtown. Like it's just relax, but I can't. And so I see that in my own life. And to me, like that's because that's the thing. You don't hear like from a mainstream thing, you don't hear like all this stuff, but yet you still like, you don't hear this hatred. You hear it on the fringes. You hear the hatred, but yet I think the mainstream still has a big problem. I think the fact that this kind of stuff is going on, the fact that the justice system, there's so much equality, as we get into numbers and stuff like that in future stuff, I think we'll be able to look at that and be like, okay, yeah, so why aren't we doing something about this? Do we really care about everybody, or do we just care about people who look like me? You know, and in a lot of cases, like, I don't care and stuff. It's the same thing with the coronavirus, right? It's like, until it starts hitting home, until it starts getting close, these are just numbers. That's like, all this stuff is ideology and numbers, ideas. Like, and we sit here and like, we launch bombs back and forth, but it's all ideas. Man, until it starts hitting home, that's the kind of stuff that's like, yeah, man, that's rough. So when you got people, this affects your neighbor, man. And so when we start viewing everybody as our neighbor and really caring about and loving them, I think that's when some things will change.
Yeah. So you said a lot, and
yeah,
I wanna remind myself that, like, you know, we won't be able to change the world. We just gonna we won't even scratch the surface in a 40-minute call or however long we're gonna be on, right? But so I do want to press into something that you said about America. And if we say we're this, if we say it's justice for all, if we say, you know, this, that, and the other as America, so like, I would say, I never say that about America. I'd say the opposite personally, right? But I would like to say that, like, you know, we all, like, the narrative that America has told the world about herself, that as a black dude, I know is inaccurate. I wonder if we all do that, right? If we all tell that type of narrative about ourselves, right? That we do that thing that America does, right? We say, that's them, right? That's the white dudes riding around in pickup trucks that are the ones that are perpetuating these type of heinous crimes, right? That's those people that, you know, tote the Confederate flags, that, you know, yell out racial slurs and different epithets, right? Those are the ones that really need to do the work. And I think that
100%.
we give ourselves a pass, the same way that America has, like, convinced herself that she's the greatest place in the world, so much that, you know, people would say, if you don't like the way you're treated here, go somewhere else, you know. And I think that Um, when I'm not careful, I'm convinced I can convince myself that somebody else needs to do the work. So I'd like to share a quick story. Like, I live in Detroit, on the west side of Detroit, and I'd say most of the neighbors on my block are black. I think we have 2 white families on my block. So a few years ago, there's a young kid walking up my block, listening to his iPod, listening to some music on his iPod. And one of my neighbors came walking up the street, and he asked me, like, did I know the kid? And I said, nope, I've seen him a couple of times, but I didn't know him. And he said, well, the kid was walking down the street looking at different cars that were parked suspiciously. Now, the neighbor that came and asked, this is a black guy, old black guy. And he went to get one of my other neighbors. Now, some of my neighbors over here are kind of like vigilantes. A lot of them have, like, license to carry, and they do carry. And, like, we've had some make some citizens arrests on some people that were actually doing some illegal things, right? But this neighbor came, and he went to get one of my neighbors that is kind of gung-ho. And now when I say gung-ho, I mean, like, he's somebody that's going to look out for you. If you have something crazy happening, you want him to get a call because he's going to respond and look out for you. So that he wasn't home. So anyway, the young kid's still walking up and down the block, minding his own business, and he ended up going into the house across the street from my home. So the older gentleman goes over there and starts to talk to the lady who lives there. My neighbor right across the street. So they ended up getting into it because my neighbor accused the young man of walking down the street looking like he was getting ready to break into a car. And all the young man was doing was walking down the street, listening to some music on his iPod. And the neighbors ended up going off on each other. I kind of tried to intervene and calm them. But this was an older black dude looking at a teenage black kid walking up and down the street listening to music, right? And, I just say that to say that when it comes to, like, doing some work on the psyche that we all have based on the images that we all have seen, like that older black man used to be a young black man, right? And if I can actually tell that story and make it seem like I'm never that person, right? The reality is, I can tell a story like that, and maybe I will next time about myself, right? Like, matter of fact, if you don't mind, I'll tell a really quick one, like that paints me as the person that's stereotyping young black men.
Yeah.
You and I were doing a job over off on American on the liver noise entirement area.
That roof job.
And yeah, the roof job. And I went to the gas station. I was getting ready to go for whatever reason, do something, pick up lunch for the team. I went to the gas station, and for some reason I had a large sum of cash on me. And as I'm in the gas station, I was like, there was like 7 young men from the neighborhood up there, and they were loud. They were cussing, and there was, a couple older women in the store, and I could tell they were uncomfortable. And I was like, dang, like, don't y'all see these elders in there or whatever? But I didn't know the guys. I'm not from that neighborhood. So when I got up to the register, I was very careful to only pull out the amount of money I planned to put in my gas tank because I didn't want them to see me pull out a large sum of money, right? So, like, now, if that was a group of white kids, I wouldn't have been thinking like that. You know what I mean? Now, I go out and I'm pumping my gas and I'm making all kind of assumptions about them. They've come outside by this point. So I said to myself, damn, DeJuan, like, you're doing that thing that you hate for everybody else to do. You know what I mean? Like, I just put all these guys in a certain category, a certain box. And what I did when I realized that, I said, you know what? I'm getting ready to go and apologize to them. Now, they didn't know I was having these thoughts about them. You know what I mean? And maybe they did. I'm sure they could feel my energy just like I could feel theirs. So I went and I talked to them. I said, look, you guys don't know it, but I owe you an apology. You know, I was doing that thing to you that I hate to hear people do. Just nobody else was there for me to have that conversation, but I was definitely having it in my head. You know, I was saying all kinds of stuff about y'all, about the way that y'all were conducting yourselves, some of the language you guys were using, and I just want to apologize. And I ended up getting a couple of those guys' phone number and saying that if any of them were looking for work, sometime we have work available. Ended up calling one of those young men like 2 years later when we were doing some clean outs or whatever for the city of Detroit. Guy ended up coming and being one of the hardest workers on the 12-man crew that we had. You couldn't make that guy quit working. I worked alongside of him, and he like outlasted me. Yeah. And I was trying to prove something to him. You know what I mean? So, I tell that story just to say that it's easy for me to tell the story about the guy down the street. It's not so easy for me to tell the story about myself. It's easy for us to all start to text and tweet, and it don't take a whole lot of energy.
100%.
You know what I mean? To repost something or retweet something. You know what I mean? But it takes a lot more work for me to try to figure out how jacked up I am and being trained and taught in this system that we've all been taught by, right? Not to mention, if you put something like an experience that you had to go ahead and feed into that narrative that we've been given, right? So it takes all kind of work to dig your way out of that. So that's it, man.
Yeah, and I think that gets to, I think one of the things that I think that's missing, and I think this is any conversation that we talk about, I think one of the main ingredients that's missing is vulnerability. It's for people to put themselves out there and be like, this is me. This is me. You know, I gotta, so, and this is a good question. This is a question I had too, and I'll get to that. But she's asking, what's the difference between being wise and discerning versus profiling? That question came to mind while I was talking, or while you were talking. Actually, I had the same question. So my mom asked that question actually. Hey, Mom. But yeah, the one thing I'll say is one of the biggest thing I think that's missing from the dialogue we're having about anything across any aisle is vulnerability. So I am so concerned not to let my guard down, not to like let you see any chinks in my armor, and I'm also waiting and watching for you to do something so I can pound you. And then if somebody on my team or me does it, I'm gonna just wash it away. I'm gonna pivot. I'm gonna try to get you to look at something else and not even acknowledge it. And there's a hypocrisy there. One, but two is like we won't get any farther. Like the scene that comes to mind, like about the scene that always comes to mind in this is like the last rap battle in 8 Mile. Like, I mean, Eminem's just losing the whole movie, and in the last rap battle, he ends up like just putting everything out there. All of his stuff is out there. He puts it all out there himself. Like, look, this is who I am, and then goes and addresses them. And I think that to me is like a good picture of like how we should be in this case. It's like, look, I got issues. Like that's why I started talking. I started putting myself out there because I'm like, I know I'm not the only one. This is awkward. It's awkward telling you that, like, I used to consume videos of seeing white people pound black people because that fed this dark psyche inside me. Because there was something so dark and poisonous and bitter within me that's what I went to. You know what I'm saying? When we start having those real conversations, I think some stuff has the potential to shift. Because when you walk in a room, Dewan, and you see something clear as day, like a Donald Sterling, like something just like super egregious happens, like one of the first things you'll say is like, that reminds me of myself in this particular situation. I think when we start doing that, like when I start talking about the fact when we were on a job site and there's this white dude using the N-word and he's using it like any young black kid was, you had to check him. I didn't even check him for you. You know what I'm saying? That's a problem. You know what I'm saying? So, like, those are the kind of conversations that we need to start having. And, like, that's one of the things I really appreciate about you is, like, you're going to speak truth about everything and about other people, but you're always going to start with yourself.
Yeah. And I appreciate you being transparent and honest. I'd like to talk a little bit of the wisdom versus profiling, right? I would say that's huge. That's huge. I mean, it's a really good question. And as much as I'd like to unpack that, I'd like to throw some food for thought on that, like back at that question, right? Like, when you are black and you live in a place like these United States, like, you're taught do's and don'ts, and like, you just feel helpless and hopeless because you can exercise wisdom and still end up dead, and nobody pays for that. You know what I mean? It's like we try. I mean, it's so like frustrating because like my son is 14 now. He's getting taller, and he wears his hair wild like the young folks wear their hair now. Like he wears the same type of gear as some of the young kids that wear whatever the latest fashion is. But he likes to stay in the house and play video games. Like, I don't even want to tell him to go outside. Like, I'm thinking about the day when he's going to start driving and he's going to teach him how to interact with police officers. I'm going to, teach him the do's and don'ts. I want to teach him like the suburbs. I want to teach him the city, so that he'll know that stuff really well. But at the end of the day, like, I have to let him go out there, and I'm somebody that operates on faith. So I pray that he's okay, even when he's exercising wisdom, and that's not going to be enough to get him to a point of safety. But it's scary, right? It's scary. And as somebody that views himself as strong and proud, I don't like to be scared. I don't like to feel like I can't do something about like this big bad system. And it's so frustrating, like when folks see themselves as allies, but they're way more vocal about stuff like the economy than they are about like issues that are important to folks that are vulnerable. And it's hard, man. It's hard to have this conversation, even in the way that you appreciate me having it. It's hard for like to have the conversation and say, you know what, like I'm gonna be healed. I'm gonna be free. Like I'm not like this system is not gonna beat me to where I'm gonna give myself a pass to be just as hateful as anybody else. It's not gonna have me to where I'm gonna think that all white people are out to get me. I'm not going to believe that like all black men are dangerous, right? Now, I start from all those places. I start from believing that black men are dangerous because that's what I'm trained based on the things that I saw growing up. You know what I mean? Some of the places that I've been and things that I've seen on TV. I'm trained to believe that no white folk are for me, right? Based on the history of this country, based on interactions and real experiences that I've had in different places, right? But I have to do work to combat those narratives. Otherwise, I stay there. And if you grew up in this country and you think that you don't like have some of those same issues and you don't have any work to do, then hey, like God bless you. But like, don't look for me to walk soldier and so side by side with you if you don't have any work to do and you got it all together. That's all I'm saying.
So where do you think we go from here? But let me say something about the profiling thing. first before you jump in. I'll just say something quick.
Yeah.
For me, and that's part of the reason, like, mainly my black friends in Detroit were like, you know you need a gun, right? Like, and these are people who carry, and they live in the city, and they recognize. For me, I knew that I wasn't ready to have a gun. So I'm not going to say anything about gun control or whether people should have one or not or anything like that. But for me, I knew I wasn't ready. And part of that, I think there's a self-awareness component ready. I do think that the profiling versus, wisdom, like all that stuff, I think that deserves attention. I think self-awareness is key in all of this. And I think a lot of us can get really uptight around this particular. There are conversations that we just can't have, and I'll be the first. I've had some terrible conversations around race and politics, stuff that just, like, I see myself getting upset, and I'm like, dude, calm down. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is one of the areas where people are really sensitive, and I think we need to start looking within first and really dealing with, like, what is going on inside of us. And so I think before we can even assess profiling, it's really starting to dig deep and understanding, why am I so angry? I think a lot of the reason many white Americans get angry or apathetic is that it's a coping mechanism, because we feel like if we are not adept at something, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with race, this is just in general. Like, there's this mindset where if I'm not adept at something, if don't have like a certain prowess at something, that means there's something wrong with me. And so anytime I feel that, I try to go to a place where I feel safer and where I feel more secure and where I feel like I can be validated. This is an area where it does not feel like a safe space. It does not feel like I'm going to be validated. And so I think it's just understanding that mentality and being able to work on that kind of stuff. You're okay. You're all right. As a person, like loving yourself first before, and being whole as possible when you enter into these conversations. So then you can do the work. Be like, yep, I'm blind in that spot. Yep, I have an issue there. So now I can grow. But if we're at a place where, like, when our identity is so tied into our performance and what we do, how we think, how we measure up to other people, like, we're not even able to hear in a way that makes sense critique or opportunities for growth or things like that. And so the response is anger or apathy. So we tune it out, shut it down, or we like just, and we don't even, like, it's insecurity. A lot of it's insecurity, I think, that we responded to. But go ahead with what is next.
So I'll throw out a couple practical things, right? I think that, and I throw out some practical things, and they might sound lofty, they might sound like crazy, but I'll say them anyway, right? I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is lacking and has lacked white folks that will stand on the front lines, right? I think that we've just witnessed the effectiveness of white folk protesting, right? I think we've watched some rallies take place in the state capitol where, like, the police would not tear gas white folk. The police would not hit white folks with the batons and all that other stuff they had when they had a riot gear, right? So I think that, I would really love to see white folk come out in large numbers trying to figure out how they can really support the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that we would be so much farther ahead if white folk were calling the Congress folk and legislature to see some laws changed and really folk pursued. I don't think that we're still having this conversation the way that we're having it right now, where we're celebrating somebody getting arrested 2 months after the crime was committed, right? Like, we're celebrating that. And I'll say this, like, nobody in the black community would be surprised if those guys get off. Nobody in the black community would be surprised with that, right? Now, devastated, you're going to have the same, like, folk that that are really frustrated, and they'll be talking about like it's time for us to stop, like talking about this and like this, that, and the other, and and I hear them, like I think I don't see like where they're really going with that, but I hear them, right? But I would say like that's one practical thing that I would love to see. Love to see some white folk mobilize white folk about this, like they did the economy when they wanted to go see some folks open the economy back up. Right? There are things that we hear when we see those type of movements, even if people aren't saying them, and there's a chance that we're misinterpreting what's being communicated. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah.
That's it. So if you on here and you white, go round up some more white folk and y'all find out where Black Lives Matter protests are and get there.
What we want to do is start just being honest and about all of it. So like, I don't know if you want to start talking about some of the topics that we talked about, if you want to throw a couple out and we kind of spitball back and forth, but we want to talk about the stuff like on both sides, all sides of the aisle, and invite people like a Jeff Leo on here so he can talk about the Asian American response and roles and this kind of stuff, because he's just brilliant and just, but start looking at all of this stuff from every angle, shining light on every component of it, because exposing the darkness, exposing our own stereotypes and those kind of things. So I'll let you get started from a topic perspective about, the other, but also we want to do a live Zoom call-in show. So almost like a radio show, except we give you access, we pull you on like one at a time, be able to like ask a question, make a statement, that kind of other stuff, be able to have other guests lined up, etc., and do this all live. So instead of like this janky setup that you see right now, with him with the speakerphone right next, like you'll see me, Dewan will pull somebody else up, have somebody behind the scenes run it all, and just start running from it. Like if we get to a place where we can start being vulnerable, and if we can start having real live open conversations, and then like people start looking inside and stop like waiting for I'm gonna stop waiting for you to mess up. I'm going to stop waiting for my chance to jump on you. I'm going to start jumping on myself first. Once we get to the place where we really start like hacking away at this log in our eye, I think something's going to happen. And I think as this starts, like I just think it has so much potential to have a real impact on people around us in a growing way.
As much as I'm serious about like white folks helping Black Lives Matter, I would say, like, we know that this stuff starts with dialogue, right? And we just really want to create a space where people can come and be honest, bring a real, authentic version of themselves, and not feel judged. And that's part of the reason it's easy to talk to Steve is because he's going to take the mask off, and he's going to show you.
I'm going to stay socially distant, though.
He's going to stay socially distant, but he's going to let you see the ugly, right? And then it makes you more comfortable taking the mask off and letting somebody see your ugly, right? And I think that that's a good place to start, where we can come and say, hey, there's some things that I could do better. There's some ways that I need to grow in this space. And we just want to create that type of space where people can come and just deal with like a real honest version of where they are when it comes to the subject matter, or subject matters like these, so that we can figure out what healing and growth looks like as a community. And hopefully that definitely will lead to some more practical action, because, if we are too scared of what somebody's going to think about us, to where we're going to leave this issue the same way we found it for the next generation, shame on us. And I better not see any of us toting ourselves out to be proud, strong, brave, anything, if we're not willing to do a little bit of work and have some conversations around this stuff so that we can try to figure out how to move the needle together. So that's kind of my take. And like there are a number of things that we want to dive into and discuss. I mean, one of the things that's really pressing for me is just like power dynamics, right? A lot of times we have conversations and folks don't understand like what they bring to the table and what they bring into a space. And living in Detroit and seeing the way progress and change is happening in Detroit and the way some of those conversations happen, and it just seems like there's not a healthy balance there. And the experience and expertise that I see the black people that have been here bringing to the table, it's not valued and doesn't carry the same weight that somebody might have some experience from a business community or bringing like capital and resources to the table.
So, yeah, so they did an article. They did an article this summer, right? About who was saving Detroit, and it's like an article on all these white entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So like that's, I mean, you can imagine how that feels, right? For somebody who's been working, for since you've known me and a lot longer than that, and some of the people that I know that have been working in Detroit and understand Detroit at a really high level to continue to see people write stories like that. So yeah, that's just one of several topics, But I mean, we want to talk about social justice issues, but the power dynamic. What does a healthy Detroit for everybody look like?
And also talking about all the stuff that and all the stuff that people don't want to talk about in these conversations, because I think there are things like there isn't gonna be asking a question. I had a black guy call me who saw the last video and was like talking about like the numbers. He's like, the black on white violence is a thing. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to talk about that. Like there's not going to be, and people are going to be able to, this is going to be a place, one of the best things for me in college was the fact that I had Myron. Man, a good friend of mine, a good friend from college, he was killed last year. He told some dudes to turn their music down, and they shot him. And that guy, Gordon, he was a good dude. Gordon and Myron, they used to ask me why white people wore sandals in the wintertime. And why, like, all these different things, shorts and all this stuff, and just all the questions they had about white people that a lot of people don't even admit they have. Like, they act like they know everything. And, man, I was able to learn so much from them because they had it was like this back and forth. It was this reciprocal, like, look, and there was no judgment. Like, I know you don't know. You didn't grow up around black people. That's fine. You know what I'm saying? Like this space is going to be a space where people can kind of ask your question. Like, there's not going to be an off-limit space for like where we're going to go with this. Like, whether it doesn't matter. Like, places white people don't want to go, places black people don't want to go. Like, the conversations you have inside your house, or the conversations you don't even let outside of your head, like, those are the kind of conversations we have. Because until we start dealing with that stuff, man, yeah, we're just not we need to start being honest in order to move forward. And the first part of it is being honest with ourselves, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, you gonna save the answer to why white people wear sandals in the wintertime for the next time we
Yeah, man, that's a cliffhanger. You got to come back.